The Pieces Lie Where They Fell by Evil Humor. Edited and co-authored by Anon E. Mouse Jr. Read for you by My Name is R. Chapter 13. Windbreaker, Page Turner, and Vix-Lei. Part 1. Windbreaker. Shaking his head, Wind tilted his head to look at Xvital, who was engaged in some idle chit-chat while he perused the drink options in this second-rate bar shop at the counter, while the bartender was serving another customer. It might look all fancy, but from the cups of booze they passed by, he could smell it was already distilled and watered down, and their marketed stuff would be as bad. Still, he had made several cadenzas by returning his empty bottles, and got complimented on his good taste, which was an old trade tactic to try and get him to buy stuff. "So, buddy," the bartender, one Tipsy Tray, looked at him with a glint in her eyes, which wasn't hard, as the Pegasus mare was a crystal pony. "What brings a cute griffin and his special lady to a place like this on the Honor Festival?" Puffing out in surprise, Windbreaker turned to look at Xvital, who was in the middle of an arm-wrestling match, while shouting in Baronissio with an earth pony, yelling back in Hosstrian, before looking at the mare. "She's not my special lady," Wind said slowly, blinking his blue and gold eyes at the pony, "and we're just passing through the west-north to get too north without too much trouble." "Ah, well, if you two love birds," the mare giggled to herself when he tried to protest this, "want to get too north without too much fanfare, I'd poke around Blas Bridge. I mean, you're normally not allowed, but—" "Oh, see!" Xvital shouted, startling every pony in the room. "Into Kara! Verdammte, bekloppte, du Katz!" the earth pony grumbled in Austrian, rubbing his arm. "Dafür, dass du kein Erdpony bist du sehr stark, und ich kann gar nicht verstehen, was du sagst." "Que?" Xvital blinked in confusion. "Pero que ustos diciendo? Te estas queja. Oh, hola, Windbreaker." "Sorry, Windbreaker," Xvital said, as she walked over to him, punching him in the arm. "Not drinking too much, I hope?" "No, nothing yet," Windbreaker winced, rubbing his arm. "You have fun?" "See," Xvital grinned, before slapping him on the back and moving away from the counter. "Come on, we've got to get moving if you want to meet your parents in time." "But I thought," the mare said, blinking her eyes as Xvital dragged him out of the bar and forced him on a steady walk outside into the bustling roadway. Xvital kept guiding him along the streets, and it was only after they passed a couple of blocks that she finally stopped. "So, you learn anything useful? Because I didn't," Xvital said with a huff, looking around to see if they were being overheard. "Not really," Windbreaker said, as he began to walk again with the Xvital at his side. Something about the Blas Bridge being used as a good way of not getting seen. "Huh. We should take a look at that before going to see the others," Xvital said, as she pulled out her map and started to trace it with her tail hand. Turning her head to look up at the street sign, she then looked at her map again. "It should be a few blocks down from where we are. And now that I say it, I don't think we should poke around there, as we kind of stick out like a sloth in the Badlands." "Speaking of," Windbreaker looked at the self-admitted thief with a tilt of his head, "as we're going to be stuck on this journey thing with each other, mind telling me a bit more about you? Beyond the whole thief—" "Ah, yeah, keep your beak shut about that," Xvital hissed at him, eyes darting around. "We're in a crowded place with a ton of ponies that want to be snobbish. All it takes is one sap that decides to speak to a police officer, and we're doomed." "I get it," Windbreaker huffed at her, his feathers ruffling at her lecturing tone. He then twisted his head to look sideways. He then twisted his head sideways to look at her. So, do you mind sharing? Well, I was born in the outskirts of our capital city, Xvital started, rubbing her chin with her tail hand. Its name was, well, it'd translate roughly to among the prickly pears growing in the rocks. We were on an island, surrounded by a very large lake, connected to some other ones. It looked a lot like this city, actually, except for being on an island instead of a mountain. My family wasn't from the richer part of society, she said with a sigh. We shared a house when I grew up with a few other families, and I'm kinda not sure who my family was back then. Still not sure if Maxtla was my actual brother or not, and Mom could never really be bothered to tell me beyond, "Oh, Vittel, family is those close to you," line whenever I asked. Vittel said, rolling her eyes and hugging herself. If you can't imagine, that didn't imprint a good concept of home and belonging in me, so when I was old enough to be on my own, I walked out one day and never really looked back. Yikes, Windbreaker pulled back, surprised to hear that some pony had had near as crappy a foalhood as he did. Yeah, not the smartest of ideas for a young girl like me striking out there to make it on her own, but I managed to get lucky enough to find someone to teach me how to survive and my craft. Of calligraphy, she said, placing a finger on his beak with her tail hand. But I learned how to really copy books from Machtia. She was a kinda second to mother to me, I guess. Taught me everything I really know, how to make a living, how to make money last, really prepared me to live on my own. I should visit her one day, just to get in touch. Maybe after all this is done with, I'll head over there to see her. Vittel smiled to herself before tilting her head down to look at him. What about you? Not much to write home about, Windbreaker shrugged his shoulders, following her around a bend, taking an apple she nicked from a stand with her tail hand, and bit into it with his beak. I grew up in the caring sisters of the Virtues hatchery, full of other griffins unlucky enough to be born there. I was picked on due to my height and other stuff. He trailed off, no desire to get into his other issue. But she was giving him a look that demanded some form of answer, and he wasn't sure how to tell her about everything. You're drinking, right? Yeah, he coughed, rubbing his throat. It was a typical experience from what I've heard. Taught how to speak properly, act properly, look properly, even. Look properly? Vittel tilted her head, causing Windbreaker to hiss as he let that part of his childhood slip out. Yeah, he said, scratching the back of his head. My plumage isn't what they considered pony preferred. Had to dye my feathers to a brighter color before I was let outside to work off my debt. He sighed, dropping his head a bit. Had to put it on my debt. Wow, that's incredibly stupid, Vittel snorted as she filched more food and placed it into his saddlebag. While he wasn't too keen on stealing, he understood that they would be on the run soon, and stocking up on food now would be good. How much is your debt, anyways? About 50 to 70,000 lunas, Windbreaker replied. I haven't really looked at my debt in a bit, so I'm not exactly sure at the moment. 50 to 70,000 lunas? Vittel squeaked out, stumbling a bit as her eyes went wide. How did you... I mean, it's Cientia a centa mil lunas. Yeah, but it's not a real big debt. Windbreaker gave her an odd look, guessing what she had said. I mean, the hatchery isn't cheap, and I've got to pay them back for housing me, feeding me, and so on. That's like 30,000 right there. And there is my parents' debt I inherited, and the interest of my debt isn't cheap. Vittel took a seat on the bench, with Windbreaker joining her. She waved down a passing waiter and took a glass of water, tossing a cadenza to her. Any ideas to pay off that debt? Pretty much the plan that every griffin has. Work up a nest egg while paying off our interest, and take part of the many offered programs that hook you up with another hatchery griffin. For about 20,000 cadenzas from one partner's debt, they will take that out for each foal you give back to the hatchery for who brings the foal over. Windbreaker let out a sigh. It's a nasty catch, really designed to prevent any family from forming. Wow, that's a really nasty system, Xvital said, reaching into his saddlebag again and pulling out his bottle of Château Margaux. Here, let's take a shot. I need it after hearing that. We'll work on getting you on the wagon later. Not with that bottle, you're not, Windbreaker hissed, taking the bottle back. That's for celebrating big stuff, he huffed, putting it back into his bag before pulling out another bottle and 2 of his tumblers. Here, if we're going to do it, let's do it properly, okay? Sounds good to me, she said, taking the bottle from him and beginning to pour drinks for the both of them. To you and the crappy system Equestria has, she toasted him, holding the glass. And to you for having the guts to leave a terrible home. Windbreaker clinked his glass with hers and threw back the drink, wiggling as the alcohol ran down his throat. Wow, this is some strong stuff, Xvital chuckled after she thumped her chest. I mean, wow. How are you not drunk all the time if you have this so often? 1, I don't, and 2, I've got a good metabolism. Windbreaker grinned as he packed away his bottle and tumblers. Come, let's get going. Maybe the others have something that we can use. Part 2. Page Turner. We thank you kindly, Rex said, bowing his head slightly to the merchants, as Paige took the groceries and went to place them in her new saddlebags, before Rex turned around and tutted. What kind of a gentle dog would I be if I did not take those parcels, Miss Turner? Thank you very much, Rex, she said, with a soft smile on her lips. It had been a real pleasure to be with the diamond dog, as he had a way of talking with others that tended to put them at ease, after they got over the fact that he was a diamond dog. They had learned that there was a real general sense of ease near some of the bridges, and they were notably lax in screening those passing by. They might be able to get past without resorting to crossing at night, but it would need to be done quickly, as whatever was after them would clamp down, and they would have their backs to the Canticle Canal, and then their quest would be over for good. She let out a small whine, thinking of her element tucked away in Knight's saddlebag. Learning that she was connected to the sternward Fluttershy and the virtuous 6 was still unnerving. It promised so much unwanted attention, and she certainly didn't want to be looked upon by others. She just wanted to be back in the great library where only a hoofful knew about her. But she couldn't go back. Others needed her, and if balance was right, the whole world would need them to protect it from this foe. Are you well, Paige? Rex asked, tilting his head. Yes, I am, Paige blushed as they turned the corner. It was just what happened this morning is all. Ah, yes, such information would be jarring to anyone, Rex chimed in reassuringly. But then again, the others and I are in the same situation as you are in, and we will have each other for support. That is true, Paige laughed to herself before shaking her head. Still, there is so much we don't know. The first step to acquiring knowledge is learning how to ask the correct question, Rex replied with a wry smile on his face. Such as why a diamond dog is in Canterlot, or why he doesn't have a pack collar? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Ah, Rex said shortly, before letting out an amused snort. I suppose I did walk into this line of questioning, and I cannot be surprised that a ward of the great library would know the importance of a diamond dog's collar. His ear twitched, and a shadow of a smile graced his face. Or lack of one, in my case. I did come across the fact that every diamond dog that is born is given a collar unique to their pack to show they belong, Paige said, tapping her chin as she tried to recall all she knew about diamond dogs. Close. A pup is given a collar when they come of age, and they are expected to become an active member of the pack, he explained. As I learned, that does not include those who question a fair deal of everyday occurrences. I was shunned due to my inquisitive nature, and I was adept enough to realize that I was incurring enough animosity that I should make my departure before things became hostile. Rex let out a sigh, shaking his head. It seems I was a bit tardy, as my pack leader exiled me for being the weak member of the pack. I was forced to leave my home, my pack, and everything I knew for Upside. I mean Canterlot. That's awful. Paige placed a hoof on her barrel as she tried to think of what to say or do to comfort Rex. I thank you for your sympathy, but to be honest, it was the best thing to occur to me. Rex shrugged his shoulders. I was limited in the under, but once I came up into Canterlot, I was able to fully expand my interests and achieve so much more than what I could have with my old pack. While I do miss my old pack from time to time, I am quite content with where I am in life, with a few further ambitions in mind. Rex then tilted his head and let out another small sigh. Or was, as the case with our mutual foe no doubt is going to put some attention onto my businesses and my partners. I do hope they are okay. I am sure they will be fine, Paige said, moving to hug him, which Rex accepted graciously. Thank you, Miss Paige Turner, Rex said, honestly enough, as they parted. So, as we are exchanging our origins, would you be inclined to share your own? From what I gathered, you are of the Great Library, yes? Yes, I am a ward of the Great Library, Paige said, bopping her head. Maybe bowing? I was left on the doorsteps because my mother knew I would have an easier life there. I was raised by Matron Hushtone and the other librarians who taught me everything I know, and... Paige gave a shrug of her shoulders, not sure if she should elaborate while in public. She then chuckled, rubbing the back of her head. It's odd that one can sum up their life so easily. I am sure that this is just the Cliff Notes, Paige Turner, Rex said with a smile on his face before frowning. Are you sad that you never knew your mother? No, Paige Turner said, shaking her head. I mean, kinda. She bit her lip as some words slipped out of her mouth. It's complicated, she said desperately to end her rambling. How so? Rex tilted his head, missing her frantic tone. Did you ever meet her? No, but I know of her, and again, it's complicated. Paige then flashed him a pleading look. Can you please not bring it up again? Of course, Rex said, filling her with relief. She wasn't sure why she slipped there, but she felt she could trust Rex not to bring it up again. I am sure that you have your reasons, and that they are reasonable. Thank you, Paige Turner said, with a grateful smile on her face before looking at a clock. We should start headed to the place, Rex. With a tip of his head for an agreement, the two of them began to make their way to the safe house. Part 3. Vix-Lei. Vix-Lei was so bored. She had thought being on a mission chosen by the gods, wrong pantheon notwithstanding, would be amazing and full of cool stuff. Not watching Mr. Grumpy Hooves talk to old buzzards that looked looked like they should be in some home for old folk. What was worse was that Nighty looked super young compared to them, and she was sure they'd get carded or something, and then this big baddie would know where they were and what they were doing. It was also super lame that Night hadn't said a word to her since they broke off into their small groups, and was acting like he didn't know her, or that they were on the same team. If she wanted to be ignored by dull, snooty people, she could have stayed home in Ledra and worked with her dad with the other shipyard masters of the Minos Islands. She was so close to just telling Nighty that, "Come, let's go," Nighty said, appearing at her table, tilting with his head that they should make a move to the doors. He didn't even wait for her. With a snort, Vix-Lei pushed herself upright from her chair and followed him outside, her fingers twitching to spin Lady Kabonk, but she knew she couldn't do that in this tightly packed place. "So what dirt did we get?" she asked, as she nudged him slightly, causing him to put on that grumpy face of his. "What I learned is that the captain of the Cadenza Guards, the Magi Supreme of the Magi of the Stars Guards, the Holy Corona of the Celestia Guards, and the Full Moon of the Luna Guards were summoned to the upper for an emergency meeting with the Captain General of the Royal Guards," Nighty said, with narrow eyes, but she could tell he was worried. She was worried. Those were the 5 big cheeses of the pony military, and she'd heard horror stories about the cap. She growled, causing the ponies around her to panic, and Nighty to start and draw his sword. "What if the Captain General is the one the balance spoke about?" "If that is the case," Nighty said, biting his lip, "we're all dead. Maybe." He tilted his head. "It will take time for them to all travel to the top and pass downward." He froze, looking past her. Turning around, she also froze on the spot, with a ton of other ponies moving to the side to let the ponies of the questioning order pass by. They walked by, wearing their blank white masks and tilting their heads from side to side, with their changeling lamp detector emitting a green light floating in the middle of them, with every pony doing their best to stay still and look but not look at them passing by. She felt her heart race as the duo went past them, with Nighty trotting on the spot, and she doing her best not to spin her hammers in a fit of nerves. One of them tilted their head to look at her, and then at its lamp, before moving forwards. It was not soon enough when they turned the corner, and everyone let out a sigh of relief, and got back to celebrating their festival. Nighty turned to her with a raised eyebrow. "I am surprised you were quiet for when they went past," he said, with a hint of a smirk finally on his face. Rolling her eyes, Vix-Lei stretched her arms behind her head. "We've got them in the Minos Islands too, you know. And trust me, I'm not stupid enough to go blab when they're around." She shuddered. "Besides, they give me the creeps." "They give every pony the creeps," Nighty snorted, walking the opposite direction from them. With their blank face masks, being completely quiet all the time, and their zealous nature against the slightest thing out of the norm, no pony would ever want to mess with them. He then frowned and looked at her. "They expect there are changelings in your islands?" "We get a lot of travelers in Ledra, and you ponies are the most common guys out there," Vix-Lei shrugged. "I know that Dad had to cater to the Order's ships a few times, and they always searched the entire island, including our temples." She bit her lip, remembering how much she hated it when she saw them go into Cosmos' temple. But it was far better to let them have their way than have them think a tar was hiding a changeling. Things got bloody and scary fast when they thought that some tar was covering for a changeling. And Thera was what happened when they did find a tar hiding some changelings. Very uncool. Nighty let out a huff. before going all quiet again. Vix-Lei frowned, wondering what it would take for him to talk to her. No way they're our foe, right? I doubt any pony would be able to tell the difference, he shot back, no doubt rolling his eyes at her. Let's just hope we don't have to cross paths with them on our quest, eh? Vix-Lei said, while bumping into him, 90 too short for her to bump shoulders. All the ponies were so short. Thankfully, they had made sure that everyone could use their doors and stuff, so she wouldn't have to crouch when getting inside of places. Your quest, he snapped, looking up at her sharply. I'm only doing this because Paige is being threatened by this foe. Vix-Lei blinked before shaking her head. Speaking softly, she told him, You really love her, don't you? 90 stopped walking and looked at her without his usual frowny face, and had an actual smile on his face. She means the world to me. There's nothing I wouldn't do for her. 90 then chuckled softly, shaking his head back and forth. I am so lucky to have her. I don't know what I would do without her by my side, or where I would be without ever meeting her. May I be as lucky as you two one day, she said, hoping to find her special Sumtar. He would have the biggest horns and heart ever. Okay, his horn size wasn't that important, but she still wanted something bigger than a unicorn horn. I hope so too, Vix-Lei, 90 said, the first time he actually used her name. Come on, we should head back. Tilting her head in agreement, Vix-Lei began to spin Lady Kabonk lazily in the air above her. Maybe things would be good after all. Someone going by Akataja, A-K-A-T-A-G-A, J-A, is the one who helped with the German translation, which makes me think either Anony Mouse or Evil Humor speaks Spanish themselves, if they weren't just using Google, because they had someone of the actual language come help with this part. One of them probably knows Spanish. Not really relevant to the story, but hey, it's something for me to talk to you guys about. Alright, speaking of the different languages, a translation of them. Here you go. Alright, first off she shouted, oh yes, which I knew that one, because yes is C, that is a very simple. Then she called out, in your face, to which the Hosstrian pony said, crazy jungle cat. You are very strong for not being an earth pony, and I can't even understand what you are saying. What are you even saying? Are you Oh hey, windbreaker! And then 50 to 70,000 lunas. That was pretty clear from context clues. Alrighty, so other things to say. Oh right, those changeling detector ponies. I suspect they're going to be important later, partially because someone specifically said, I hope we don't have to run into them later. That I don't think they're going to get their wish. Also, apparently, at least one of Paige's secrets has to do with her mother, who she knows of but has never met. It's not proof, but it is further evidence for my claim of perhaps she's a changeling. Until that is proven true or false, I'm going to keep thinking of it. Maybe it is what's going on, maybe it isn't. But now it's in my head and it's not going anywhere. Well, I hope you had a pleasant time listening. I'll see you again next time. Bye, everyone.